So I saw this meme going around on Twitter, and I thought I'd make a quick video just debunking it, because I'm really sick of people saying, oh, Donald Trump is a fascist. We are currently in proto-fascism. This is literally fascism being created before our very eyes. When in fact, it's nothing out of the ordinary at all. Donald Trump's platform is completely normal. It's something that in the 90s Bill Clinton would have signed off on. It's basically the same as his platform now.
Okay, so this is the appeal to the controlled opposition, which is essentially an appeal to authority. Just because the other party would pass off on something doesn't make it not fascistic. We've just had this system implanted in our government for so long, this military-industrial complex. And it's a two-faced threat. It's a two-headed snake. At least the smart people on the left, they tend to recognize, and on the right as well, they tend to recognize it's a two-party threat. That both parties have voted consistently to expand the military budget, expand the militarization of police. Joe Biden supports not defunding the police, but in fact increased funding of the police. And this is a total right-wing myth that I wouldn't be surprised to hear Sargon espouse himself. So, I mean, just right out the gate, that argument is horseshit. The Democrats and Republicans might as well be the same party at this point. And there's plenty of evidence to support that.
So I just thought we'd go through this, because point by point, this is just such nonsense being shared by atheist luminary Aaron Ra.
It's bollocks!
Early warning signs of fascism. This is from the US Holocaust Memorial Museum. Each early warning sign is here in present-day America.
Rubbish!
Bingo. Really? Powerful and continuing nationalism. Really? Is that the problem? I mean, what are the signs of a powerful and continuing nationalism?
I'll tell you what the signs are. Come on, this is elementary. This is elementary. Have you not seen the past over half a century of just pillaging the planet? The military empire that the United States has created around the globe. You can say that the actions are justified. The neo-libs and the neocons would agree with you on that. But to say that it's not what it is, there's not a nationalist intent in it, that we plant our flag in every piece of land that we can find on the planet, steal their resources. I mean, this is just, if you're American, this is common sense. But I guess the British haven't quite reflected on this yet. I mean, dude, you're literally in the country that invented colonialism, pretty much. So you really don't understand this basic concept of how nationalism and jingoism and fascism ties in. Now, fascism, I would say, is more of an inward strategy. But what happens when you over-police the streets? What is that then? Is that communism? It could be. You can make that argument. But to say it's not nationalist, come on.
Imagine you'd see brown shirts marching through the streets, and the best they'd be able to do is, say, pull out a rally from 3 years ago or something like that with the tiki torches, with like 80 people in it or whatever. Okay, that's the powerful and continuing nationalism.
No,
it's not.
It's not just the Ku Klux Klan or the Proud Boys. They are fringe groups. We're talking about the entire government. The ingrained system that both parties are funding with our taxpayer dollars, right? We're paying them to pepper spray us and tear gas our own citizens for peacefully protesting and snatch them up in fucking vans. You're going to tell me that that's not fascism? Or haven't you been paying attention? I'd forgive you if you haven't, you fucking crumpet. Fucking Redcoat, man.
There's a powerful and continuing anti-nationalism campaign going on, is there? I mean, it's not like the Seattle and now Portland protesters are trying to break into federal courts and burn them down and are fighting with federal troops. It seems that there is a devout and determined anti-nationalism that's been protesting for now 50 days. Plus, in fact, it's probably coming on...
Hold up. You just admitted that they're anti-national. You see, this is the problem with your argument. You're saying that nationalism essentially doesn't exist or exists in such small part in our country that it's a non-issue. But then you're saying that these anti-nationalist protesters, well, which is it? Does nationalism exist or not? So you're saying that their fears and their anxieties of the protests are completely unfounded. Let's hear
60 days now. I say that. I mean, at what point do we say, look, the problem clearly is not with nationalism in our countries, especially in America. The problem is with what we can just call communism, anti-nationalism.
Anti-nationalism and communism are not the same. They're not connected until you can make the case that they are connected, right? And I'll admit, on the fringe left, yes, they are connected. But how many people are really going to see that through the end? I mean, I don't know if you know this, Sargon, but in America, we have a long, storied history of defiling anybody who even espouses communist or socialist or democratic socialist rhetoric. The Democratic Party won't even get on board for Medicare for all. They won't get on board for legalizing pot. They won't get on board for even the slightest progressive / you can call it socialist legislation. You could say that communism exists in some form in these fringe groups, but where is the power really concentrated?
Disdain for human rights. I mean, what does that even mean? Your entire political system is built on human rights. It's constitutional. It begins with the concept of your human rights.
Patriot Act. Boom. The issue is that these fascists, these statists, have repeatedly defiled that document. They have completely violated it. With each never-ending war, the president has expanded his executive authority and literally said, hey, I don't need congressional approval anymore. We violated the Geneva Convention on rules of torture. We violated international law repeatedly. So how is that not nationalism, Sargon? That is the definition of nationalism, is going against the agreed statutes that all the countries have agreed upon, going against the UN, saying fuck you, pulling out of virtually every agreement, the Paris Climate Accord. So are you really going to tell me that nationalism doesn't exist as a fucking, not just on the fringe right, but as a cancer, systemic cancer? You're fucking twisted, man.
So where is this disdain for human rights coming from? I mean, maybe for the right to own property, from the communist agitators and revolutionaries and the race warriors.
Really?
Maybe they don't care about human rights.
Really? Property? You're going with that? Okay, yeah, because we have so much anti-property. It's like, I don't know anybody who's actually against the concept of private property, but we haven't even gotten to that point. I mean, these Antifa people, the fact that they're raiding the federal government, I mean, that just shows that they're anti-government. The same as the right-wingers who say the government has too much power. So we're agreed on that much. I don't know.
I suppose so. I mean, to be fair, maybe Aaron was criticizing the left by tweeting this, because it seems that this is, so far, warning us about the dangers of the fascism coming out of the left. I mean, identification of enemies as a unifying cause. I mean, do we need to talk about the great enemy that is white people and white supremacy and how it's everywhere? Do we need to talk about how there is a unifying enemy among left-wing thought, Aaron? And this is such a silly thing as well. Like, the identification of the political enemy is what every political ideology does. It's what everything does.
You're reading off the early warning signs for fascism. Where does it say anything about white people? Go ahead, read it. Read it. Powerful and continuing nationalism. Okay, disdain for human rights. Okay, sounds about right. Just look at the Bush administration. That's all I need to tell you there. Identification of enemies as a unifying cause. Okay, where does it say white people? Where does it say anything racial or identity politics related on that? All it says is we identify the enemy. And what is the enemy? The enemy is the state, are the statists, the boots that are treading on people of all colors The fact that we are unifying against fascism, I guess it's just not getting through to you because you seem to want to make it into a racial issue. It's not. The exact thing that you're criticizing on the screen says nothing about race. You're a fucking nematode, man. What the fuck is wrong with
If it's promoting
fucking
a
stupid
positive
ass
vision of what should exist, then those things are not it. Like the Muslim against the kuffar, the communist against the capitalist. It's anything that is not it can be used as that. But then supremacy of the military. I mean, what does that mean?
What? What does it
like
mean? What does it mean? We already okay, I already went over this. I'm not going to run through it again, but again, this is just blatantly ignoring history. This is like looking at the British history of colonialism, your country, and say, oh, what's the big deal, man? We save millions of people. What's the big deal, bro? Come on, man. This is basic.
The junta that's taken over and a military dictator is in power, because I don't think that accurately describes the United States.
I'd actually agree with you that I don't think Donald Trump is an autonomous dictator. I think we have an oligarchy. But the fact that the people are rising up against that and saying, no, if you tread on us, we will respond. The vast majority of these people are peaceful protesters. But I mean, how much longer do you expect us to stomach this police brutality? Seeing our families literally being killed and choked by police, and to not respond violently.
Like, what kind of mental would suggest that the United States government is being puppeteered by their military? In what way do the military have political influence? Like, direct political supremacy?
They do. Well, the weapons manufacturers, for one, they get a shit ton of kickbacks. It is hard to say exactly where the power structure begins and ends, but we do know from history that every president who professed a new foreign policy of peace ever since Harry Truman wound up, in fact, expanding the military global domination. I mean, just look at every administration since Harry Truman. We have essentially scaled back very few troops, and we have expanded our global dominion to every single continent. You could argue ever since the 1890s with the Spanish-American War. Manifest Destiny even before that. You could say that's military, but let's just stick to the modern military. I mean, there is just this massive historical case that this is a systemic issue in the United States government. And you are so fucking dense that you cannot see how this has happened. Endless war alone. The excuses, the weapons of mass destruction that they couldn't prove that they had, that the enemy had.
And saying rampant
We're only
sexism
3 minutes in.
is the sort of post-war order of the picket fenced house with the wife and the kids. Is that rampantly sexist? Because, I mean, if that is, I mean, we're not going to call post-war America fascist. But, we've just defeated the fascists. Yay, who are you? We're the fascists. Like, come on. I don't think we agree on what sexism is, but women seem to be well represented in American life, and they seem to have the same rights as men.
I would actually agree.
Controlled mass media. Well, that definitely doesn't apply to the US, does it? I mean, you've got your First Amendment, so legally they can say anything they goddamn well want.
It doesn't?
And the government can not do a damn thing about it. But, I mean, most media coverage, by an overwhelming degree, has been negative against Donald Trump. And that...
Okay, so does that disprove that it's not controlled? Just because they hate this one guy, that doesn't mean it's not controlled. It's still corporate media. They still have a consistent message, at least when it comes to the military, which is honestly probably the most fascistic element, the police and military-industrial complex, but the media does everything it can to prop it up. It is controlled. The fact that it's against Trump is incidental. They just don't like him because he's non-PC or whatever.
I think Mussolini had a line that was something along the lines of, the press can say anything they want as long as it's not against the government. Well, this is cast iron proof that this is not a fascist country that you're living in, when almost all of the media, almost all of the time, talks negatively about the guy in charge. That's just the opposite of fascism.
You see, here's the difference. I don't think Donald Trump's the one in charge. I think the CIA is the one in charge. Let me put it this way. The president is in charge of practically everybody and everything in the executive branch. He has to be a diplomat. He has to be a figurehead. He has to go around the world and see these other leaders. And he also has to control all of these federal agencies, distribute funds, do executive. I mean, he has such an enormous amount of power. So how do you expect everything to go his way under his purview? Name one time in recent memory that you've seen MSNBC, CNN, or Fox News, the big three, go against the CIA talking points. They literally have CIA people on as commentators, as regular commentators. Trump is not the government.
And we've got obsession with national security. Obsession with national fucking security. And is that Trump, is it? Is that meant to be Trump that is obsessed with national security?
He's admitted it literally every fucking day. We need more cops in the street. Oh, we need more. I will protect our national security at any and all costs. Bro, like, he is literally the law and order commander-in-chief. That's what he calls himself. Like, don't act like this guy isn't acting, at least selling himself as an authoritarian, because he is.
Russians may have interfered with the election. Is that Trump, is it? Unreal. I mean, that is such a laughable thing to have on there and say, oh, look, this is just like America now. Yeah,
the national security state has been proven. The NSA. What's that? Is that just a side note? What is that? The unprecedented funding, the wiretapping, the Patriot Act, which is renewed by every fucking president. You're completely whitewashing our history. You haven't read a goddamn actual piece of critical history. Trump is a symptom of the cancer. He's just a symptom. You act as if Trump, oh my god, oh, the left is so triggered, bro. You criticize Trump, therefore you're criticizing the country. Your simple-minded, narrow view of monkey see, monkey do, conservative dogma, follow the leader, it's just extinct. It's completely short-sighting everything the government encapsulates and has taken over.
Anything of any particular relevance to the person that they're attacking. It's made them look bad, obviously, but it didn't get rid of Donald Trump. It meant nothing. Corporate power protected. Now, this is not an aspect of fascism. Now, this is a book called Vampire Economy. It was written by a communist who lived in Nazi Germany called Gunter Reimann. He was an economist, and he did a book study basically of the experiences of the capitalist businessman. As a communist, this was not normally the kind of person he wanted to defend, but this is just a quick thing of how he described it. Most businessmen in a totalitarian economy feel safer if they have a protector in the state or party bureaucracy. They pay for their protection, as did the helpless peasants of feudal days. It is inherent in the present lineup of forces, however, that the official is often sufficiently independent to take money but fails to provide the protection. So the businessmen do not have their power protected at all. The preceding chapter described the decline and ruin of the genuinely independent businessman, who was the master of his enterprise and exercised his property rights. This type of capitalist is disappearing, but the other type is prospering. He enriches himself through his party ties. He himself is a party member, devoted to the Führer, favoured by the bureaucracy, entrenched because of family connections and political affiliations. This is what a fascist economy looks like. Property rights and corporate power are not protected. They are made subservient and entwined with the ruling party. So,
granted, I do not have a snooty book full of political theory in front of me written by a dead man. But there does exist such a thing as corporate fascism, and in every bad society, property still exists. Property always is defended in some capacity. The question is the distribution of that property, the distribution of those resources. Let's look at Germany, okay? The Nazi government developed a partnership with leading German business interests. who supported the goals of the regime and its war effort in exchange for advantageous contracts, subsidies, and the suppression of the trade union movement. Cartels and monopolies were encouraged at the expense of small businesses, even though the Nazis had received considerable electoral support from small business owners. Yeah, no similarities with America at all. Yeah, small businesses supporting Donald Trump, and him giving away advantageous contracts to giant businesses. I mean, it says it right there, Sargon. You define corporate power very narrowly as the mere ownership of property. But all it says that the Nazis did, who were the ultimate fascists, I guess you might call them National Socialists, but I mean, we're really blurring the line here, come on. The reason the Nazis built up their power was because of these giant contracts with giant business interests. That's what happened. So they were not, by any means, anti-business. The same country that you just referenced in your book, by some dead guy, versus what actually happened.
Look down, total union membership of nearly 15 million people in the United States. That's 10% of the total workforce, with 33% of those being...
Yeah, it used to be way more too, Sargon. It used to be way more. Union membership has rapidly declined because of these union-busting trade agreements, which, ships out our jobs, which as a Trump-tard, you should be admitting is a bad thing. I thought Trump was going to be the guy to bring our jobs back, but apparently not.
Again, not very fascist to have a large and independent private sector. It's the total opposite. They want a totalitarian state where there's nothing against the state, nothing outside the state. Everything is within the state. To have...
Hold on. Labor unions. This is another right-wing myth that is just patently absurd. Labor unions have to do with the collective ownership of the workers. Statism is completely different. Statism is the state controlling everything. That's communism / fascism, traditionally. Labor unions is where the workers have a say in the practices of the company. That's all it is. It's not saying, hey, we want the state involved. You have to be able to distinguish your worldview here, Sargon. I know you're trying so hard to own the libs. But I think people who are out there protesting, genuinely believing what they believe, I think they've thought this through a little harder than you're doing in this video.
Things happening, most people outside of the public sector not being interested in unions, again, is a sign of a healthy democracy. That's how things should be. You shouldn't need a union. But nearly 15 million people have, so I mean, is that suppression? When millions of people can join unions, is that suppression? I don't think so. I don't see how that is.
Alright, man, so this is once again the argument. It's like, oh, you have this freedom. You have this small freedom. Yes, we still have the freedom of speech. But how much longer? Yes, we still have the right to bear arms. How much longer? You're basically arguing, hey, we're free to join a union, and therefore there is no fascism. Fascism, come on. You're free, man. You're fucking free, huh? Dude, you are such a bootlicker. It's honestly embarrassing. There are legitimate reasons to join a labor union, and there are legitimate reasons not to join a labor union, depending on the type of union, depending on the organization, depending on, the charitableness of the company you're working for, depending on the type of job you want. I do think there should be a choice. I'm not arguing that everybody has to be involved in a union. I'm saying that they might help because they are a means to an end of working class solidarity. Traditionally, they have been. Have they been hijacked by the mafia? Absolutely. But that has nothing to do with the problems of fascism. You are betraying the argument. You're not staying on topic here, Sargon. You are intentionally, or maybe accidentally, blurring the lines here.
What am I supposed to say? You don't have a state church. What's the state church that you'd be intertwined with? with the government. I guess the best you can complain about here is that you have religious people in your government. Well, most of your country is religious. What do you expect? You have all the constitutional protections you need to exercise your right to any religious practice that you want, within the law, obviously. You don't have a theocratic state. You might have areas that are of high religiosity, but that's an issue that you have with society, not with your government. That's not fascism.
I agree.
And then we get to disdain for intellectuals and the...
I agree. So far, you have 2 points that I agree with. I agree with there isn't rampant sexism, and the religion and government, although in certain laws it is still very much ingrained, there's not a big enough case that the state has chosen a specific religion, even though the vast majority are Christian. There have been recently more Jews and Muslims in office, a Hindu or two probably. So that it's not a specific religion, although I would argue there's still, obviously a strong religious influence on government policy and foreign policy. George W. Bush alone. I just need mention his ghost once more.
This is my favorite of all time, because we can just go to the left-wing response on COVID and the corporate power that's being protected in Silicon Valley against the state, but where they're removing this press conference of doctors. This guy is fucking a Yale MD, PhD, what was he? Professor of epidemiology at the Yale School of Public Health. Right? If this guy can't be trusted as an authority on COVID, who fucking can be? What qualifications do we need, if not an MD, PhD, Professor of epidemiology at an Ivy League school? It's like, what more do you want? But no.
So we do know. This is interesting because I do think these social media platforms are inextricably linked to government secrecy. I mean, in fact, we have had Facebook give away their data. We know they're in bed with the NSA and government spying programs. We know the same of TikTok and the Chinese. We know the same of Twitter. I mean, we can assume they're all doing it, even though the proof is pretty scattershot, and they're trying to hide it the best they can. But you could just as easily make the case that this Twitter censorship is a part of that fascism. But you're not going to make that case. You're going to say the opposite. You're going to use it as an example that fascism doesn't exist? Okay.
Suddenly, disdain for intellectuals and the arts. I mean, if the arts can be considered to be any kind of right-wing media that's being suppressed, well, maybe.
Not just right-wing, huge left-wing censorship too. They're censoring anybody who basically is anti-establishment. Okay, can we just agree on that much? Because there have been numerous examples of right-wing and left-wing censorship, and I think what they really want is a culturally homogenous corporate center that never exposes the CIA, never exposes our interventionism, doesn't talk about the wealth gap, wealth disparities, doesn't really address homelessness and the need to solve this crisis as well. There's just so much that we don't talk about that is being replaced or displaced by Trump 24/7. So I'd agree with you that Trump is perhaps unfairly a target on some issues, like Russiagate.
Obsession with crime and punishment. Yeah, I found that really interesting, that one too. Obsession with crime and punishment. Who has an obsession with crime and punishment?
Prison industrial complex. People in both parties. Joe Biden, a Democrat, wrote the 1994 crime bill, war on drugs. I mean, the list goes on, man.
Donald Trump, does he go on about it all the time? Or does he want law and order because of the disorder that the communist revolutionaries in the streets have been ginning up? It seems to me that it's the left, again, that is saying defund the police, abolish prisons. It doesn't seem to be Donald Trump going on about crime and punishment. These are the protesters that he's responding to. He's not the one raising the issue. And again, rampant cronyism and
potato. Of course he's not going to say crime and punishment versus law and order, well, that's just a euphemism at this point. Because what we see, let's stick to the facts here. The war on drugs has destroyed way more lives than drugs ever could. It's destroyed the free market, which you should be in favor of. The prison industrial complex, they're literally getting rich off of incarceration, mainly non-violent drug offenders in which there is no victim in the crime. I mean, where's the morality in that? I think it's perfectly clear what this means. Obsession with crime and punishment. You have euphemized it to mean law and order. You see Trump going on, law and order every day. Like I said, potato, potato. You're just simply using a euphemism. But I think you agree on this point.
Corruption. Well, maybe. Oh, there we go. I mean, the impeachment did find some rampant cronyism and corruption, and this is pretty naked. Hunter Biden just came out and said, well, if my surname wasn't Biden, I wouldn't be on the board of this Ukrainian gas company making, what was it, 50 grand a month or something.
So once again, that's a point that you cannot refute, that you've admitted, because Joe Biden is too a fascist. The people who are arguing that fascism, America is fascist, they are not arguing against the notion that Democrats are in on this. They acknowledge that Democrats are in on this. You are not acknowledging this. You are showing half of the argument. That is what the conservatives do. They only show one side of the argument. The left is showing both sides of the argument. And if you have a problem, then your issues obviously with like the MSNBC Russiagator types, we probably see eye to eye on that. So we might as well classify them as the fascists, or perhaps in your case, the communists. You seem to be making this case that the communists are taking over. Well, we know that's not the case because they're being pepper sprayed and tear gassed in the streets. They're being thrown into unmarked vehicles. Not a word from you on this. Not a fucking peep. Even though this video came out literally yesterday, days after we knew about this. You should have known about this as a political commentator. You're full of shit, Sargon. Let's hear the last of your fucking half-baked argument.
I mean, when Trump said it, Obama laughed at him and said that this was a conspiracy theory. Aaron, are you saying that there have been fraudulent elections? Like, I mean, are you going to be talking about the problem with mail-in ballots? Because, again, Trump's against those too, you know? There have been problems with them. But, like...
Even though he voted by mail, so...
And the thrust of Obama's argument is pretty sound. It's like, this is a huge and decentralized system that no one person or group have control over. So, maybe you could, make a small part of the election rigged, but you couldn't rig the whole thing because you're just not in control of all of this dispersed action. And so... Like, coming back to this, I'm just like, okay, let's assume that these are all early warning signs of fascism. It seems like the fascism is coming out of the left, so you're right. Each warning sign is here in present-day America.
Actually, I wouldn't say... I actually disagree with the paper here when it says that these are early warning signs. I think these are basic symptoms. Some of these, at least. Some of these. I'm not going to go through each of them, but I think... At least a large part of these are symptoms of fascism. So I would in fact take the hardline position on that. I don't think, even though I disagree with some of the points made on this bulletin.
But it's not Donald Trump. If anything, this is a powerful advertisement for Donald Trump. But that wasn't what Aaron was trying to say. He was trying to say that Trump is a fascist. I don't buy it. I just don't believe it.
Well, here's where I'll agree with you, and I'll finish on this, Sargon, is that sadly half the country thinks that tear gassing its own citizens is okay, as long as they are communists, or at least can be perceived as communists or socialists, or want Medicare for all, and want to make people's lives better. There are always going to be radicals who lash out in wrong ways. We can condemn those individual actions, but what we should not do on both the left and the right is lump all these people in the same boat and completely write off their allegations, completely write off their qualms with the state. We should be critical of the state. We should hold the state to a higher standard. While I agree we should not completely coat them with one broad brushstroke of, hey, it's all communism, hey, it's all fascism. We should at least acknowledge where these tendencies coexist. I do believe that Donald Trump, in his rhetoric, has Hitler-esque tendencies. I don't believe his power is completely alike. I do think it is more evenly distributed amongst the deep state. I do think the fascism is way larger and therefore far scarier than if it was just in one human, which is the case you're trying to make, that we think Trump is the end-all be-all of fascism, and if we just replace him with Joe Biden, the fascism goes away. I think the left has been fairly clear that it's not true, at least a large part of it. So, again, I think it's a half-baked theory that you're espousing. I think you need to read up on your history, the recent history of American interventionism and foreign policy. I think the bulletin is absolutely clear. I think it's absolutely right in just the foreign policy aspect of it. I think the sexism part is iffy. It basically isn't true. I think there is a disdain for human rights in the policing, and there is a prison industrial complex. There is mass corruption, huge corporate power, huge corporate and state spying tactics on the people. Again, it's just disgusting that anyone would defend this at this point. Whatever you want to call it, I would say there are certainly fascistic tendencies. And I'll end on that note.